Hi lovely viewers, welcome to Get Well Stay Well on Revelation TV. As always, you're joined by me, Cyrus Fernando, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by lovely Felicity. How are you doing?
Hi there, Si. I'm fine, always well. Looking forward to doing the show today on GMOs, and goodness knows how things have changed with our food and how things have been genetically modified.
Okay, so we're talking about GMOs. Just give us an idea, an explanation. What is GMO?
Well, it's when the scientists start messing around basically with our food and genetically modifying it so that they cross tomatoes with fish and all kinds of weird things to try and make. Basically, it's to make more money for the food companies. It's so that the shelf life will be longer for produce. And of course, they're putting in a lot of chemicals. And this is basically why people are getting so sick, because they're short of the vitamins, the minerals, you know, the usual things we're talking about, the living enzymes. The body, the cells of the body just do not recognize scientifically synthesized and synthetically made food. These cells just cannot absorb them. And so we think we're having a big meal, and in fact, the nutrients are just not there. Right. So the tummy may feel full and we feel we've had a big meal, but in fact, the cells are still crying out for the nutrients that they need, which of course are the original foods that God put on the earth for us, the onions and the carrots and the apples and everything in their natural form. But it's extremely difficult now to get them in the natural form, because everything is sprayed, everything is treated with pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, all these different chemicals. And so this is why there is such a problem with health. And so as the Get Well, Stay Well lady, I feel we really must do a program. And you know, the interesting thing is that years ago, I saw Howard interview Jeffrey Smith on GMOs. This is years ago, and they were so right. You know, Jeffrey Smith knew that this was going to happen, and we're now sadly reaping the consequences of the change in our food.
And how long has the engineering on our foods been taking place? How many years are we talking?
It's been going on really since the war. You know, at the end of World War II, a lot of the German chemists who had been working in Germany on things like the mustard gas and the gas in the concentration camps, for instance, they were brought to America at the end of the war in order to revamp and do things with the American big pharma, the big pharma with a PH, big pharma with an F, and to alter food, and it was all about making money. So these guys came and became naturalized Americans. They were working mostly in California, and they were working in these laboratories. So various products that we won't mention, but are well known as pesticides and sprays that you use. They have, you know, there was Agent Orange, which was used in the Vietnam War. A lot of people came home with the Gulf War syndrome, remember that?
Yeah, for sure.
Other things. They reckon that was the Coca-Cola, which had been left in the sun for months during that war, and it was stacked somewhere, and then the guys were drinking it, of course, and the heat had actually created a really bad chemical inside. So this is why people had something called Gulf War syndrome. However, saying that, people have also been told that they've got Gulf War syndrome from other things, and they weren't anywhere near Vietnam. So it is to do with the chemicals, and you know, we just really want people to get back to organic farming, that you know we can get the produce from our local farmers or grow it ourselves, even better.
Now, a film has been produced called Fed Up, hasn't it? That's on GMOs.
Good title.
Tell us,
Fed Up.
Tell us a little bit about that film.
Well, it's really interesting the way these films are coming out now, and you know, they were so concerned about the GMOs, and people don't always take it from the documentary point of view. They like to be entertained. So they're making these really, really good films, and they're putting in some history. If people will just look at the full film, you know, they would love it. And I think the thing is, with our Get Well, Stay Well program, we can only do a little 3-minute clip.
Yeah.
And so we're just introducing the idea to people.
Excellent, wonderful. It's food for thought, Felicity.
Food for thought.
All right, well, let's have a look at this little trailer here called the film called Fed Up on GMOs.
In the harvest of 1999, 60% of Canada's canola crop was genetically engineered, 90% of Argentina's soybean crop, 50% of the U.S. soybean crop, 33% of the U.S. corn crop was genetically engineered.
Industrial agriculture is damaging the basis for future production. We've got soil erosion, soil compaction, salinization, waterlogging, destruction of beneficial biodiversity, loss of natural enemies of pests. That's really occurring at an alarming rate.
Three things needed to come together to make the Green Revolution work. One was the development of specific high-yield varieties and often dwarf varieties of wheat or rice, and also corn that were derived by special outcrossing and hybridization techniques that Norman Borlaug perfected working in Mexico and also in the southwestern United States. Secondly, there was a tremendous investment of funds from the Rockefeller Foundation and the World Bank to assist poor countries to develop a broader food base based on these resources. And then third, there was a tremendous availability and input and requirement for pesticides, fertilizers, and irrigation, which combined to reinforce the value to American commerce of supporting this type of agriculture.
The Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation in the 50s were concerned that if the issue of hunger in the Third World wasn't addressed, then poor people in those countries would be ripe for communist subversion.
The Green Revolution, which is really the introduction of chemical agriculture under forced circumstances to countries like India, was basically created as an antidote to social change. It was meant to reinforce patterns of inequality, which it did. The smaller peasants lost their land because they could not afford to keep up with the credit payments linked to the Green Revolution. The intensive water use has left large tracts absolutely desertified. The agricultural diversity that fed people has been wiped out. And yes, the production of rice and wheat has increased, but that is not an absolute increase in food. The production of legumes, of dals, of chana, of chickpea, of oilseeds, of mustard has all come down.
Faced with the choice of crop failures and resulting worldwide starvation, the use of pesticides and herbicides seems inevitable.
If we talk about pesticides specifically, they came out of the defense industry. The first modern synthetic chemical pesticides were derived from nerve gases developed by the Germans in World War II. And they found that by some simple changes in the molecules, instead of having their greatest toxicity be for human beings, they could have their greatest toxicity be for insects.
There were plenty of chemical factories left over from World War II. We got a raft of secrets from Nazi Germany that allowed us to make organophosphate pesticides that we did not have the capacity to make before. My uncle was in the intelligence service in the Army and went to the IG Farben plant and got all the chemical secrets that they had for making organophosphates as well as plastics. And this in part contributed to a great expansion in our knowledge base for making chemicals that could be used in the pesticide.
That's an excerpt from the film Fed Up, and that's on GMOs. Felicity, tell us a little bit about the pesticides. How much of the foods that we're eating today or consuming or that we've been consuming over the years have sprayed pesticides?
Well, nearly everything has now, Si, to be quite honest, nearly everything has. And, you know, the chemicals he was talking about used in World War II was like the mustard gas, you know, that they used to gas people. And that was the basis, and it's still the basis of chemotherapy, because it kills cells, and they're trying to kill the cells and not the patient.
So what danger does that cause to our health if we're eating this kind of foods with the pesticides?
Well, it actually starts to destroy our cells, of course, and change our DNA. Now, this is interesting not only for our generation, the people who are eating it, but when you alter DNA, this is going to go on to your children and your grandchildren, maybe your great-grandchildren.
Of course.
So, you know, there's been a lot of interesting experiments to see how people are changing as they have these genetically modified foods. There's things like aspartame, for instance, and monosodium glutamate, you know, these synthetic sugars.
Well, tell us a little bit about aspartame as well. What sort of foods contain aspartame?
Well, nearly every processed food contains artificial sugars.
Right.
So it might be saccharin. It used to be called saccharin, then that got a bad name, so they called it aspartame.
Yeah.
And people hadn't got a clue what that was.
Because saccharin was the times when people used to consume their coffees and their teas and say, I'd substitute my sugar with the saccharin, because they
Yes.
thought that was a healthier way.
And I remember going to America and finding these little packs of either blue or
Yes,
pink
yeah.
sweeteners.
Yeah,
And we thought
that's
how wonderful
Yeah.
that was. You know, we were so naive, we were so taken in.
Yeah.
And in fact, they cause much more danger than having the real sugar cane.
What is the substitute then for today? If our viewers are watching us today and they're used to consuming high-based sugars, for example, what is the substitute for that?
Well, it's very easy. You just get something called stevia, stevia. Stevia is it's a green plant. It's a broadleaf plant that's very sweet. In fact, you only need a tiny amount of it, and you can get it in granulated form and you can get it in liquid form. Before that, there was agave, agave, agave syrup, which was made from cactus. But now that's genetically modified a great deal. So we just have to be careful. I mean, the natural sweetness would be dates and raisins, perhaps, that, you know, you've grown yourself in the garden.
Yes.
And so, you know, I love dates, actually. I think dates are a wonderful sweet to have.
Yes.
Especially the ones you get from Israel that are absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
The medjool dates are absolutely gorgeous.
I mean, I had the privilege of visiting Sri Lanka not long ago, and I look at the population there in the cities and the towns and the people seem to be a lot more healthier. The diet there is so much more healthy. They're not eating processed foods, and yet we come back to the West, we come back to where we are, and we're surrounded by processed foods everywhere. Is that one of the main causes, for example, of obesity?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, if we go back to the natural foods, and you know, we have thought in the West how sophisticated we are and how we must get everyone onto our wonderful foods, and in fact, we've been so misled. And now we're going back to saying, okay, let's go back to the brown rice that they have in India, you know, the natural rice.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the vegetables.
Yeah.
And in Africa as well, where
Yes.
people are growing things naturally. And those countries have not been so contaminated, which is really interesting. So all the things we've tried to do in the West to, you know, westernize and bring people up to date with vaccines, for instance, and changing the food, has fallen absolutely flat. And
Wow.
now intelligent people are wanting to, you know, go to places like Sri Lanka, like Thailand, places where life is still much more natural.
Let me ask you a question. Once an item of food has been genetically modified, is there any way it can be restored to normality?
Well, no. I mean, what they have done is they've got some seed banks now. They've got a seed bank up in Svalbard, which is up in the Arctic, and it's very, very near the Arctic Circle. It's Norwegian, and they had a seed bank there where they were trying to keep some of the seeds. So, but it was flooded. It was flooded
Yeah.
last year with an ice melt, because you know the ice is melting up
Yeah.
in that area.
Yeah.
So but the Norwegian government is spending 18 million
Wow.
to try and salvage this seed bank.
So it's time for us to take control of our health and take control of the kind of foods that we're eating and consuming. What about us growing our own fruits, growing our own vegetables? At least we know where the source is coming from.
Absolutely, that's the perfect way to do it. And you know, the healthiest food in the world is the little sprouts, the little bean sprouts, the little sunflower sprouts, buckwheat sprouts, because that's when the little green plants have the strongest chlorophyll
Yes.
and living enzymes in them, and that's the moment we want to eat them.
Now, we're talking about health and staying healthy. Another topic I'd like to move on to is smoking, Felicity. Tell us a little bit about that and what are the major dangers of that?
Well, we know what smoking does. You know, it destroys people's lungs. It causes heart disease. It causes cancer. And we really should ban smoking because it's such a filthy habit. People smell, their clothes smell, everything reeks of cigarettes.
Okay.
And it's sad, you know, even in our restaurants outside, people will light up even outside, and the smoke will drift across. It's really infuriating.
Interesting. Okay, so let's have a look at our next item. This is talking about smoking.
Scientists started realizing that tobacco triggered negative health effects as early as the 1930s, yet the CDC estimates that smoking is still responsible for 480,000 deaths every year in the U.S. So what is it about smoking tobacco that's so deadly? Hey guys, Julia here for D News. In 1964, a landmark report from the U.S. Surgeon General made the case for the link between smoking and cancer and heart disease. In the years since, the evidence has only piled up. Smoking is lethal in a few ways. In those early studies I mentioned, researchers found that cigarette smoke causes ciliostase, which is when the little hairs lining your airways die. Without those hairs, your body has a hard time filtering out bad things like cigarette smoke. Smoke isn't just one thing, it's a combination of particles that result when you burn cigarettes. So it's like a feedback loop. The more you smoke, the more smoke gets in your lungs, and the more likely tumors will form due to the damaging particles. As you know, tobacco smoke has a lot of carcinogens. According to a study published in the journal Molecular Cancer Research, there's over 60 compounds known to cause cancer. Compounds like polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are formed when things like oil, gas, and tobacco are burned. They can even form if you char things like steak on a grill. And once those compounds get past the dead cilia, they find their way to the vulnerable parts of your lungs. Some of these PAHs lead to chronic inflammation of the lung, a condition which raises the risk of cancer. Some of these chemicals trigger mutations when they bind to the DNA. The compounds get stuck, forming what's called an adduct. That makes it really hard for the DNA to replicate, which can potentially lead to mutations. When this does happen, one of the most significant mutations occurs in a protein called B53. The protein handles a lot of cell regulation, and its function depends on a variety of factors, but it's often a tumor suppressor. When this protein experiences a mutation, that function gets switched off, allowing tumors in the lungs to grow and spread. One study published in the journal Clinical Cancer Research found that a mutation in P53 was a marker of poor cancer prognosis. But research published in the Journal for the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology found that these compounds can trigger heart disease too. Basically, these compounds cause an overproduction of certain fatty acids in endothelial cells, the cells that line your blood vessels. This causes them to die. So yeah, smoking literally kills your blood vessels. Smoking also increases the risk of heart disease by narrowing the blood vessels and increasing the formation of clotting plaque, which can lead to deadly heart attacks. In fact, smoking counts for 33% of all heart disease-related deaths in the U.S. Still don't believe smoking hurts? Well, it can literally turn your lungs black. 2 recent studies confirmed that, smoking is deadly. The smoking gun, carbon nanoparticles. Similar to black lung syndrome, when coal miners inhaled coal dust, these particles from cigarettes get stuck in the lung and wreak havoc. In smokers, the particles can build up and lead to severe emphysema, a nasty and potentially fatal condition that makes it harder to breathe. The particles come from material that hasn't burned up all the way, which in this case is the tobacco itself. They're small, around 30 and 40 nanometers in size, which is about half the width of a human hair. But over time, these nanoparticles build up in the lungs and can do some serious damage. The first study published in the journal eLife found that they are so small that once they get into the dendritic cells, they can break apart DNA. So yeah, there's lots of ways cigarette smoke causes cellular damage through a variety of molecular mechanisms. With all the scientific evidence against it, I'm baffled why so many people still smoke.
A lot of pieces of information, a lot of statistics there shown, but in the end, the conclusion is smoking is dangerous and it can severely cause danger to your health as well. Felicity, is smoking, obviously it's an addiction. Is it a mental addiction or is it a physical addiction?
Well, I think it's quite interesting. I've done a lot of research on this, and it's really it's the body's reaction. When you first have a cigarette, you feel absolutely dreadful. You know, you give it to a child or a teenager, they will choke, they'll feel sick. And the thing is that the body always tries to survive. So the body responds with turning out eventually the body starts churning out a sort of pleasure endorphin to counteract that nasty thing. So if you're going to continue to do this to me, I'm going to have to cope. So that's what it does, instead of making you sick, which would actually be very much better if it did that.
Yes.
So I mean, the chemicals are absolutely frightful. Just, you know, even going through the ABC of them, there's acetone, acrolein, ammonia, and then benzene, benzopyrene, and the C's would be carbon monoxide, creosol. You know, that's just the ABC of it. So they're really noxious things.
Yeah.
But there is this, my parents smoked a lot when I was little, which had a bad effect on my lungs. And, you know, you can't ever really get over that. Because
I mean, yeah, sorry, Felicity. I mean, I was going to say, a lot of people who smoke, they say, I need to smoke because it takes away my anxiety. But quite often, it makes them more nervous at the same time, the fact that they are smoking.
Well, then you get dependent on it.
Yes.
So then you're
when they
worried
don't have
about
that cigarette, then they're even more anxious.
Yes, that's right. It's like when we don't have our mobile phones with us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
but what
yes.
does that cause to our mental state of what goes on in our minds? The fact of saying I need a cigarette to calm me down, and then all of a sudden you have that cigarette, and they say it just relaxes me.
Yes.
What is it doing to our system?
Well, it's releasing the endorphins in the brain. So in fact, it's a brain problem more than a physical. You know, like sugar is a physical addiction, that you got to get that sugar into the body. With this, it's more a mental thing. And of course, this is where we need self-control. And remember, in the fruits of the Holy Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And that's probably the most difficult of them all.
Interesting.
So it's self-control, and we can get over it. And it's interesting to see the quickest way to do it. To actually stop smoking, which is really what we should all be doing.
Okay, so let's have a look at our next video. This is giving some advice how to stop smoking.
Smoking is bad for you. It causes cancer and a gazillion other diseases. You know that, we know that. This is your life, we're not going to tell you what to do. But we are going to tell you the science behind quitting if you or someone you know is trying to kick the habit. Now, before we break down the options, we have to first understand why it's so difficult to quit in the first place. And that comes down to one word: nicotine. It's what's naturally found in tobacco, and when inhaled, it travels quickly to the brain. There, it releases dopamine and other feel-good chemicals into brain cell receptors. This creates more and more nicotine receptors in the brain. When these are starved of nicotine, you go through intense withdrawal, which can lead to depression and tension until you get your next fix. So the trick may be to gradually give your brain less and less nicotine, which is where the highly advertised treatment of nicotine replacement therapy comes into play. We're talking about patches, chewing gum, lozenges, inhalers, and even nasal spray and lollipops. But do any of these methods actually work? Let's take one of the most popular, the patch. This is typically a reservoir of nicotine sandwiched between occlusive and permeable adhesive layers. Stick it on your skin, and the nicotine slowly leaches through the layers of your dermis to the hypodermis, which contains blood vessels needed to bring the drug into the bloodstream. This happens at a much slower rate and a lower concentration than smoke inhalation. Different patches contain different amounts of nicotine, slowly ridding your body's dependence on the drug. But is it effective? Well, one study conducted by the Harvard School of Public Health looked at 787 adults who had recently quit smoking. They were surveyed 3 different times over the course of 6 years and asked questions about what type of nicotine replacement therapy they had used, the duration of this therapy, if they consulted a professional, and their current smoking habits. During each one of those check-ins, around a third of the participants had relapsed. This led researchers to conclude that using nicotine replacement therapy is no more effective in helping people stop smoking cigarettes in the long term than trying to quit on one's own. There are also alternative ways to quit smoking. Some people have tried acupuncture or hypnosis, but based on some of our latest videos, it's a little up for debate on whether or not those work. And others have even tried lasers. Yeah, lasers. Well, low-level laser therapy. The company, Innovative Laser Therapy, claims that an hour of therapy is all you'd need to quit your addiction. The laser targets specific points in the body that the company alleges are related to addiction, claiming it relieves withdrawal symptoms and prevents cravings. The owner says the laser basically stimulates the nerve endings to tell the brain to release a flood of endorphins, but basically isn't science. And though there have been a few studies to determine its validity, they are few and far between with inconclusive results. But perhaps the best thing to do, maybe nothing at all. In a 2016 study published in the journal Annals of Internal Medicine. 697 adult smokers who smoked at least 15 cigarettes a day were divided into two groups, those who quit cold turkey and those who gradually reduced their smoking over the course of 2 weeks. Researchers recorded their results both 4 weeks, then 6 months later. Nearly half of the cold turkey group successfully quit smoking after a month, compared to 39% of those who gave it up gradually. At the half-year mark, the rates of success reduced to 22% and 15% respectively, but this still means the cold turkey technique is more effective than gradual reduction.
That's some certain ways of giving up smoking. Felicity, in your opinion, what is the best way to give up smoking?
Well, it's interesting to look at all those different ways, but at the end of the day, you're just putting the nicotine into the body still in a different way, and certainly if you're swallowing it and, you know, in the gum or something, you're going to have problems in the digestive systems instead of the lungs. So really the thing is, as he says, go cold turkey.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that when people are actually diagnosed with cancer or some catastrophic disease, and they're told they've got to give up smoking, they do. And
Yes.
it's more salient in the mind than this pleasure-seeking thing.
Yeah.
You know that the next one is going to kill you. Okay, you don't do it.
Simple as that, no choice, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone who is dependent on cigarettes because they say that it relaxes them? What are other methods to relaxation, to calm people down, so to speak?
Well, you know, there's. I love chamomile tea. I think chamomile tea is the most wonderful sedative, and that people can buy anywhere in a herbal shop. You know, this sort of thing is natural, and it just calms the body down. There's valerian, there's all these different sleeping things. You know, you can get little sleeping patches. But really, at the end of the day, why not have chamomile tea about 6 o'clock in the evening?
And what about, obviously, our faith? We're Christians, and we have a wonderful relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yes.
So if people are anxious, just look up, talk to him as a friend, have that relationship and pass your problems on to him.
And also there's that wonderful scripture, I can do all things in Christ Jesus who strengthens me. So when you look at the next cigarette, you say, no, I'm not going to do it, because then you're starting to win. And yes, it's so important, because if people are anxious and nervous, really it's a fear of death eventually, you know, at the bottom line. So when we know we're going home to be with the Lord, that takes away that fear. And so really, we don't need to have these horrible, noxious things in our lives like cigarettes.
Excellent.
I'd love to do some more programs on this.
Excellent. I'm sure we will. Thank you so much, Felicity, as always.
Great pleasure.
Thank you also to our lovely viewers for joining us today. If today's program's been interesting, please log on to our website, revelationtv.com. We're also on social media. Search Revelation TV on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter and Instagram. Thank you so much indeed for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye.